Hey there, welcome back to the deep dive. Last time we spent some time looking at what happened after the Black Death, how English, which was, well, a bit all over the place back then, started to get more consistent.
Right. We looked at figures like Chaucer and how official documents began using English more.
Yeah, and that huge development, the printing press, those were really key in sort of pulling the language together.
Definitely. That was English starting to standardize, becoming more unified, especially in writing. But to really get modern English, we actually need to dig deeper, go back even further, before that standardization really took hold.
Back to a time when things were changing fundamentally.
Exactly. A really seismic shift.
And that's our focus today. We're not just adding layers, we're going right down to the foundations. This deep dive is about how French, you know, right across the channel, with that long, sometimes tricky history with England, how it didn't just lend English a few words.
Oh no, it went much deeper than that.
It fundamentally reshaped English from the inside out.
It's an amazing story, linguistically speaking.
Hmm.
You've got English, fundamentally Germanic, related to German, Dutch,
Right.
and then French, a Romance language, straight from Latin. You'd think English would look mostly like its Germanic relatives.
But it doesn't always, does it?
Not really. Because of centuries of contact, and especially one massive event, French ended up being arguably its biggest single influence.
I know English borrows a lot. It's like a sponge for words.
It absolutely is,
Yeah.
very open. But the main reason for this deep French impact, the trigger event,
That has to be the Norman conquest.
that's the one. So, our mission today. Let's unpack how this French influence wasn't just, vocabulary sprinkled on top.
We're talking structural changes.
Profound structural changes. How French left this huge mark, setting the stage for the English you speak today. And it all starts, 1066.
Okay, 1066. We all learn the date. But what actually happened linguistically right after William the Conqueror arrived? What was the immediate impact?
Well, 1066 is the pivotal moment here. William, Duke of Normandy, that's northern France, invades, wins at Hastings. And this isn't just swapping one king for another.
It was a total regime change.
Complete replacement of the ruling class. The aristocracy, the government, the church leaders to an extent, gone. Replaced by Normans.
So suddenly, the people in charge, the king, the nobles, the judges, the army commanders, they're all speaking Norman French.
That's it.
Can you imagine? The language of power just flips overnight, while most people are still speaking English.
That's exactly it. Norman French becomes the language of the royal court, government, law, the military, even higher education.
And English.
English gets pushed out. It
Yeah.
becomes a language of, the common people, the peasants, the lower classes mostly.
Though it wasn't like no French words existed in English before then, right?
No, that's a good point. There were some earlier borrowings through royal links and trade. But 1066 just opened the floodgates. It made the French influence massive and systemic.
And that flood meant a huge wave of new words coming in over the next few centuries.
Enormous. We're talking thousands and thousands of French words absorbed into English over the next, say, 300 years or so. And these weren't just for new concepts. Often they were alternative words, particularly in areas linked to the new rulers, to power, to a more sophisticated way of life.
Like government and law.
Exactly. Government, law, religion, military life, but also things like cooking, fashion, art, medicine. Think of words like government itself, parliament, judge, jury, crime, justice, clergy, sermon, prayer, captain, soldier, army, all from French.
Wow, that's a lot of core concepts.
It is. They either replace Old English words or existed alongside them, often adding a different nuance.
And there's that classic example, the one about the animals versus the meat. That really shows the social split, doesn't it?
Ah, yes, it's such a perfect illustration.
Rare.
Because the live animals, the ones being looked after out in the fields by the English-speaking peasants.
They kept their old English names.
Right. Ox, sheep, pig, calf, deer, swine. Good, solid Anglo-Saxon words.
But then when those animals were cooked and served up on the tables of the Norman lords,
Suddenly the meat gets French names. Beef from French boeuf. Mutton from mouton. Pork from pork. Veal from veau. Venison, originally meaning any hunted game, from venison. Even brawn from brawn.
so the person raising the pig spoke English, but the person eating the fancy pork roast spoke French.
Basically, yes. It's like a little linguistic window into that social hierarchy. The English speakers tend the animals. The French speakers eat the prepared dish.
That is just fascinating. It's not just borrowing. It's layered by class, and you see that elsewhere too.
Definitely. Think about the home. Basic things might keep English names, But items associated more with comfort or status often got French names, like chair, table, curtain, cushion, wardrobe.
Right, adding that layer of maybe sophistication or status.
Exactly. It created these pairs, or sometimes triplets, of words with slightly different connotations, maybe formality or social context, that we still kind of feel today, even if we don't consciously know the origins.
Okay, so a massive vocabulary dump, layered with social meaning. But you said French changed English from the inside out. That implies more than just words. Did it mess with the sounds too, the pronunciation?
It absolutely did.
Yeah.
French didn't just add words, it actually altered the English sound system itself. It introduced sounds, or made existing sounds more distinct, what linguists call phonemes.
New sounds, like what sounds did English get from French?
Well, the classic examples are the sounds V and Z. In Old English, these sounds existed, but often just as variations of F and S when they appeared between vowels. You didn't really get them starting words frequently. French loan words brought V and Z right to the front of words. Think of very, voice, value, veal or zeal, zone, zodiac. This helped establish V and Z as fully separate, distinct sounds in English. Sounds that could change the meaning of the word just by being there.
So having fan and van be clearly different words, starting with distinct sounds, that's partly thanks to French.
That's a big part of it, yes. It cemented that distinction. French also influenced the pronunciation of some existing English vowels. And it introduced new combinations, like the oi sound, the diphthongs you hear in words like choice or joy or loyal. That came in strongly through French words like Middle English joy or joie.
Okay. And what about spelling? Did French influence how English was written down?
Oh, hugely. This connects back to who was doing the writing after the conquest. For a long time, many scribes, the people copying manuscripts and writing documents, were trained in French.
So they were used to French spelling rules?
Exactly. And when they had to write English, they naturally started applying the spelling conventions they already knew.
Can you give an example, like how would an Old English word be spelled, and then how did a French-trained scribe change it?
A really common one is the vowel sound in house or mouse. In Old English, that U sound was often spelled simply with AU. So Old English hus, house, or muse. But French scribes were used to writing a similar long U sound or related sounds using ow or sometimes ow. So they started spelling his as house or house and muse as moose or mouse. Same for coo becoming cow.
Ah, that explains you and ow in so many English words. It wasn't originally spelled that way.
Often not. That U spelling for that sound is largely a French scribal habit imposed on English. It stuck, even when the pronunciation changed later, like during the Great Vowel Shift.
Which is why our spelling can seem so, well, inconsistent today. We're still using spellings based on French conventions from centuries ago, even if we don't say the words that way anymore.
That's a huge part of the story, yes. Those scribal practices really fossilized certain spellings. Another example is QW in Old English, often being respelled as Q based on French, like queen becoming queen.
Okay, so vocabulary, sounds, spelling, but the really deep stuff, the inside-out chain, you mentioned grammar. How on earth could French change English grammar? That seems fundamental.
It is fundamental and perhaps the most significant impact overall. Old English compared to modern English was much more synthetic.
Synthetic. What does that mean in linguistic terms?
It means it relied heavily on word endings inflections to show a word's job in a sentence.
Mm.
Different endings for nouns depending on whether they were the subject, object, possessive, singular, plural, their gender. Adjectives had to agree with nouns. Think a bit like German or Latin, with cases and declensions.
Right, lots of complex endings.
Yes. Now, French, although it came from Latin, which was highly inflected, had already lost a lot of those complex endings itself by this period.
Okay.
And when you had Norman French speakers who weren't using complex English inflections, interacting constantly with English speakers, especially in situations where communication needed to be clear, maybe simplified.
People started dropping the complicated English endings.
Exactly. The process of losing inflections was already underway in English, but this intense contact with French speakers who didn't know or use those endings really accelerated it. English grammar simplified, relying less on endings and more on word order and little function words. It pushed English towards being more analytical.
Analytical meaning word order matters more, and using words like to, for, the, do, have to show relationships.
Precisely. Word order became much more fixed and crucial for meaning. Prepositions took over jobs that case endings used to do. Auxiliary verbs became more important. And there's a really fascinating specific grammatical structure that English borrowed directly from French word order.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
It's putting the adjective after the noun.
And wait, we normally say red car, big house, adjective first.
Almost always in everyday speech, yes.
Right.
That's the standard English pattern. But think about certain fixed, often official or formal phrases. Secretary General, Attorney General, Court Martial, proof positive, heir apparent, sum total.
Ah, you're right. We don't say general secretary or martial court in those specific titles.
Exactly. That noun-adjective order is standard in French. Secrétaire général, cour martiale. It's not native English grammar, but it got imported lock, stock, and barrel for these kinds of established phrases. It's a direct structural borrowing.
Wow. That really is changing the structure.
It is, and you also see parallels develop in how basic verb tenses work, suggesting French patterns influenced the way Middle English structured its verbs, too.
So for centuries, French dominates the power structures. It pours vocabulary into English, changes sounds, spelling habits, even tweaks the grammar. How did English ever come back from that? How did it eventually push French aside and become the main language again?
It wasn't overnight, obviously. It was a gradual shift over a couple of centuries, driven by some major historical events that weakened the French connection and boosted English's status.
What were the key turning points?
Well, one big factor was politics. The English kings started losing their lands back in France. Critically, Normandy itself was lost to the French crown in 1204.
Ah, so the English nobility became less French. Their focus shifted entirely to England.
Pretty much. Their ties to the continent weakened significantly. They became more purely English landowners and power brokers. Less need, less natural inclination to maintain French over generations.
Makes sense. What else?
Then you have the 100 Years' War, kicking off in 1337, lasting, well, over 100 years on and off against France.
Right, a massive, long conflict.
And war has a funny way of shaping identity. Fighting France for so long really fostered a sense of English nationalism, English identity. French started to be seen as the language of the enemy.
So speaking English became more patriotic, even for the upper classes.
It certainly contributed to that feeling, yes. It reduced the cultural prestige of French within England.
And didn't the Black Death, the plague we talked about before, also play a role here?
It did, absolutely.
Yeah.
The Black Death hit England hard in the mid-14th century. And while it affected everyone, it seems to have disproportionately hit the clergy, who often used Latin, and the urban nobility and officials, who were more likely to be bilingual or French dominant.
So tragically, it reduced the numbers of the French-speaking elite.
Relatively speaking, yes. At the same time, it created labor shortages, which increased the economic power and social importance of the surviving English-speaking commoners and merchants. Their language gained practical value and status.
So loss of French territory, war with France, creating nationalism, and the plague shifting the demographics.
Combine all that with figures like Chaucer choosing to write his masterpieces in English, and the government needing standardized English for administration, the Chancery standard we mentioned last time. All these forces work together.
Pushing English back to the forefront.
Exactly. You see milestones like the Statute of Pleading in 1362 mandating English in law courts instead of French. Parliament started using English more regularly around then, too. English was reclaiming its place.
What an amazing journey for the language. Suppressed, transformed, and then re-emerging.
It really shows the resilience and adaptability of language, doesn't it?
So let's wrap this up. What's the main thing you want people to take away from this deep dive on French influence?
I think the absolute key takeaway is that French influence, driven by the Norman conquest, was far more than just adding fancy words. It fundamentally altered English. It changed the sounds people made, it changed how they spelled things because of those French scribes, and crucially, it deeply impacted the grammar, pushing English away from its complex Old English roots towards the more analytical structure we know today, even borrowing specific word order patterns.
And this whole process, stretching over centuries after 1066, is what created Middle English.
That's it, the language that Chaucer wrote in, the language that eventually became modern English. It's a hybrid, really, forged in that period of intense contact and social upheaval.
It makes you look at things like that doomsday book, William the Conqueror's Big Survey, differently. It's this Latin document full of Norman names managing an English-speaking country. That linguistic tension is right there.
Absolutely. It embodies that moment of transition. That administrative machine, initially run in Latin and French, eventually needed English to function across the whole society, but an English that had been profoundly shaped by those other languages.
Those old documents really come alive when you think about it that way.
They do. And maybe a final thought for you to mull over. Think about how often English has multiple words for roughly the same idea, often tracing back to this history.
You mean like an old English word, a French one, maybe a Latin one?
Exactly. Like ask English. Question, French origin, interrogate, Latin origin. Or kingly, English, royal, French, regal, Latin.
Or rise English, mount French, ascend Latin.
Precisely. They often carry slightly different shades of meaning, different levels of formality, different connotations. Freedom versus liberty, goodness versus virtue.
And we just sort of know which one to use when, don't we?
Instinctively,
Mm.
you navigate this incredibly rich, layered vocabulary every day. And that richness, that complexity, is a direct legacy of the historical journey we've just talked about, especially that deep transformative encounter with French.
That really puts our everyday language in a whole new light. An incredible story. Thanks so much for walking us through that.
It was my pleasure. It's a core part of understanding how English got to be the way it is.
And for you listening, that wraps up our deep dive into how French reshaped English from the inside out after 1066. Be sure to join us next time. We're tackling another huge question about the journey of English. How did it become the world's language? We'll explore its global spread and the key moments that took it from being spoken on one island to being used all across the planet. See you then.